The night I found my daughter, she wasn't breathing warmth, she was breathing despair. Outside her husband's house, at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, while laughter and champagne echoed from inside, I realized family can be the cruelest kind of stranger. And I swore that night justice would hear her name. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us keep telling stories like this one. And tell me in the comments where you're listening to this story from. We love to know how far these voices of courage and redemption are reaching across the world. On Christmas Eve, I came home without warning. The air was sharp enough to bite through my coat as snow swirled under the pale streetlight. Outside my daughter's house, the world looked peaceful, a postcard scene, white roofs, glowing windows, ribbons of smoke rising from chimneys. But peace, I would soon learn, was only an illusion. I stepped out of the taxi, my boots sinking into a thick crust of snow. It was 29 degrees that night, the kind of cold that finds its way through bone. My breath fogged the air as I stared at the house I hadn't visited in nearly half a year. The porch light burned softly against the dark, and behind the big front window, I saw a flicker of golden warmth. A Christmas tree shimmered with ornaments, candles lined the mantel, and laughter spilled out in bursts. For a moment, I thought maybe everything was fine, maybe the months of silence between us had just been my imagination. But then I noticed something strange. No footprints led to the door. No sign of movement in the snow. My heart began to race, slow at first, then faster, like the start of a storm. I tightened the strap of my old duffel bag, the one still marked with faded letters from my years as a taekwondo coach, and walked closer. Through the window I could see them, the Harringtons, my son-in-law's family raising glasses of champagne near the fireplace. Charles, the father, sat in his tailored suit like a judge behind his bench. His wife Veronica leaned back in her chair, her painted lips curved into a satisfied smile. Their daughter Grace was showing off a diamond bracelet to one of the cousins. They looked like the portrait of holiday joy, every gesture rehearsed, and yet something felt wrong. I searched for my daughter's face among them. Rachel, my only child, the girl I'd raised after her father's passing, the one I'd trained to face life with courage. I imagined her laughter joining theirs, imagined her smiling again, but I couldn't find her. Not at the table, not near the fireplace. My pulse quickened. I stepped off the sidewalk, boots crunching on the frozen ground, and moved closer until my breath fogged the glass. Still no Rachel. Only the glow of red wine, the rhythm of careless laughter, the sound of jingle bells coming from a speaker inside. Then, faintly, I heard a sound behind me, a small, muffled cry. It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it. I turned. The wind hissed, scattering snow across the porch. At first, I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted, and I froze. She was there, my daughter. Rachel was curled up on a wooden chair beside the porch railing, her head bowed, her arms wrapped around herself. Her blouse was thin, damp from melting snow, her hair clinging to her face. Her slippers were soaked through, her skin nearly blue. I dropped my bag and ran to her. "Rachel!" I shouted, my voice cracking in the empty air. Her eyes fluttered open, barely. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice fading like breath on glass. I pulled off my heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her skin was icy beneath my hands, her body trembling uncontrollably. I lifted her, feeling how light she'd become, how fragile. The front door was only a few steps away, and behind it the sound of laughter roared louder, so loud, so cruelly indifferent. Inside, they toasted to love and family while my daughter was freezing to death a few feet away. I pounded on the door, my knuckles raw against the wood. The music kept playing. I banged again, harder. Finally, the door opened with a hesitant creak. Veronica stood there, wine glass in hand, her painted smile stiff. "Mrs. Coleman," she said slowly, as though I were a ghost. "What on earth are you doing here?" For a moment I couldn't speak. The contrast between her warmth and Rachel's frozen body in my arms hit me like a blow. "You left her outside," I said, my voice trembling. "You left my daughter to freeze." Behind Veronica, Ethan, my son-in-law, appeared, his tie loose, eyes glazed with drink. "She wanted fresh air," he muttered. "Don't make a scene." I felt something burn in my chest. Years of discipline, patience, and quiet strength, all of it snapped in that instant. I stepped forward until my boots touched the polished floor, the snow from my soles melting into tiny puddles. I met his eyes and said, very quietly, "You've made a mistake. You think silence is weakness, but you're about to find out what a mother's anger looks like." The laughter behind him faltered. Glasses stopped mid-air. I set Rachel gently on the couch near the fire, tucking my scarf around her neck. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold anymore. Something inside me had shifted. I'd spent my life teaching students to control their power, to strike only when necessary. That night, I understood what that truly meant. Because this wasn't a fight about pride or revenge, it was about survival. What I saw in that living room wasn't just cruelty, it was decay. A family that valued reputation more than compassion, appearances more than humanity. And as I stood there, breathing hard, snow still dripping from my coat onto their expensive rug, I knew one thing: this Christmas Eve would not end the way they expected. If you're hearing this, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Every like, comment, and subscription helps me bring more real, heartfelt stories like this to life, stories that remind us of what love, courage, and truth really mean. Your support keeps this voice alive and strong. Now, before I continue with what happened next, let me ask you something. Imagine you arrived at a warm house on a freezing night and found your own child left outside in the snow. Would you? Stay calm, call the police, and wait for justice to handle it. Or B, walk in, confront everyone, and demand answers right there? Tell me your choice A or B in the comments below. I'm curious how you'd react if it were your child sitting in that cold. The taxi drove away, leaving behind only the crunch of its tires fading into the frozen air. For a long moment I stood there, suitcase in hand, breathing in the sharp December wind. It smelled like pine and chimney smoke, the kind of scent that used to mean comfort to me. But that night it only made the silence heavier. I was back in Spokane after months away, my teaching trip to Seattle finally done, and I had imagined this evening 100 different ways. In each version, my daughter Rachel would run to the door when she saw me, laughing, crying maybe, pulling me inside to the warmth of her home. We'd drink cocoa, talk about the past year, and I'd feel that after all the distance, family still meant something. The street was quiet, lined with houses glowing faintly through the snow. A string of colored lights blinked across porches like gentle heartbeats. My boots sank into the drifts with each step, the snow rising almost to my ankles. I should have felt exhausted after a full day of travel, but instead there was a restless pulse inside me, something between excitement and unease. I kept picturing Rachel's face when she opened the door, the smile she had when she was little, missing her 2 front teeth, promising she'd never leave me behind. I had missed her wedding the previous year because of a national championship. I'd sent a letter instead, written from a hotel room in Denver, telling her how proud I was of the woman she'd become. In that letter, I told her to never let anyone make her feel small, no matter what life brought. I'd repeated that line to every student I ever coached. Discipline, confidence, respect, that was the foundation of Taekwondo and of everything I believed. I never imagined my daughter, of all people, would be the one tested by those same lessons. The driver had asked earlier if I wanted him to wait, but I'd said no. I wanted this surprise to be mine alone. Now, standing in front of Rachel's house, I began to feel something else: hesitation. The curtains were drawn, but light flickered through them, warm and inviting. Somewhere inside, faint music played: piano, strings, the sound of a Christmas carol I used to hum when Rachel was a child. Silent night. For a moment I smiled, remembering how we used to bake sugar cookies together, how she'd cover her apron in flour and pretend she was a chef. Those memories felt so close I could almost reach out and touch them. Then my phone vibrated. A single message flashed on the screen from my friend and fellow coach. "Andrea, did you make it safely? Weather's bad tonight." I typed back, "Yes, just arrived." Going to surprise Rachel. But before I hit send, something in me paused. Maybe I should have called first, I thought. Maybe a warning would have been better. I erased the message and slipped the phone back into my pocket. As I walked up the path, the crunch of my boots seemed too loud in the stillness. A gust of wind lifted snow from the shrubs, dusting my coat in white. The porch light flickered once, then steadied. It was such a small detail, but it made me stop again. The air around the house felt off, like the quiet wasn't peaceful but empty. I brushed it off as fatigue. I stood on the step, gloved hand hovering just above the doorbell. My reflection stared back at me through the glass-lined face, hair streaked with silver, eyes that still carried the alertness of a fighter. I realized then how much older I looked than the last time I saw her. I had been 58 when she got married. Now, at 66, the years of training, travel, and solitude showed in every line around my eyes, but beneath that, I still saw strength. That same stubborn light that had kept me standing through the death of her father, through sleepless nights running a small dojo on the east side, through every challenge life threw my way. "All right," I whispered to myself, "let's see that smile again." I was about to press the bell when the faintest sound reached me from inside a man's voice, sharp and impatient. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone froze me. Then laughter followed, several voices overlapping, rich with the ease of people who had everything they wanted. I told myself not to eavesdrop, that it was probably nothing, yet I couldn't move. I leaned slightly toward the window and saw through a small gap in the curtains. The living room was elegant, every corner glowing gold. A tall tree stood by the fireplace, gifts stacked neatly underneath. Around the table sat the Harrington family, my son-in-law, Ethan's parents and sister, the kind of people who measured worth in polished silver and the right last names. Charles raised his glass, his voice booming over the music. Veronica, draped in pearls, laughed too loudly. Even from outside, I could tell it wasn't a joyful laugh, it was a performance. I searched for Rachel among them. Maybe she was in the kitchen, maybe upstairs, but she wasn't anywhere in sight. The longer I looked, the tighter my chest became. Something was wrong. The longer I stayed there, the colder the night felt, pressing against my skin like a warning. I took a step back from the window, trying to calm my breathing. I told myself she was fine, that she'd appear any second. I adjusted the strap of my bag and stared again at the door. The music inside changed, jingle bells now, loud and cheerful. It struck me as strange that no one had cleared the walkway, no footprints but mine, no tire tracks near the gate. Even the wreath on the door looked more like decoration than welcome. The wind rose suddenly, carrying a thin, distant sound. It was faint but unmistakable, a sob, maybe, or a breath caught in pain. I turned instinctively toward the porch. My first thought was that it was the wind playing tricks on me, but then I saw it, a soft movement near the corner, where the railing met the wall. A figure, small and still, almost blending into the shadows. The sight sent a chill through me deeper than the winter cold. My stomach clenched. The instincts that had saved me countless times on the mat, the awareness of danger, the surge of adrenaline flared to life. I dropped the suitcase, its thud swallowed by snow, and took a cautious step forward. My mind was already whispering possibilities I didn't want to believe. The wind picked up again, scattering flakes into the air, and in that moment, as the music and laughter carried on inside, I knew that whatever awaited me on that porch was about to change everything. Through the glass, the world inside shimmered in a kind of warmth that should have been comforting, but instead felt like mockery. The glow of amber light spilled across the snow, soft and golden, outlining every curve of the window frame, but I couldn't shake the unease tightening around my chest. From where I stood, the house looked alive, a picture of joy carefully painted for the world to see. The Harringtons sat together in their perfect little tableau, toasting crystal glasses, the fireplace humming in approval. Everything gleamed polished silverware, folded napkins, laughter layered neatly over the low crackle of burning wood. Yet as I stood there, an outsider peering in, I could sense the distance between that brightness and the truth buried beneath it. Charles Harrington sat at the head of the table, his posture straight, every gesture precise, like a man used to control. Even through the window I could see the authority in the set of his shoulders. His deep voice carried easily through the glass, slow and heavy, the kind of voice that had never been contradicted. His wife Veronica reclined beside him, sipping red wine, Her lips curved in a fixed, satisfied smile. There was something theatrical about it, as though she were performing happiness instead of feeling it. Their daughter, Grace, was showing off a diamond bracelet to a cousin, her laughter loud, glimmering with vanity. I watched them move, their conversation flowing easily, too easily, like people who had never needed to measure their words, never worried about consequences. I looked for Rachel among them again, expecting at any moment to see her appear with that small, careful smile of hers, carrying a dish or serving wine. But she wasn't there. Every chair was filled except one, the one nearest the window. The table around it was untouched, no plate, no glass, not even a folded napkin. My stomach turned. That empty space felt deliberate. The longer I watched, the colder I felt. The inside of that house was everything winter tried to imitate but could never achieve: heat, color, laughter. Yet none of it reached me. None of it reached Rachel, wherever she was. I pressed a hand against the glass, feeling the separation like a wall between two worlds. On one side, performance. On the other, silence. I leaned closer, letting my breath fog the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of her in the reflection of the polished floor. What I saw instead was movement. Ethan, my son-in-law, standing near the fireplace, holding a glass in one hand and gesturing with the other as he spoke. His face, handsome in a hard, deliberate way, was animated with pride. He was telling a story, something that made the others laugh. He looked comfortable, at home, as though everything in that room existed for him. The firelight gleamed against his gold watch, and his voice carried through faintly, sharp and confident. I tried to read his lips, to guess the story. The fragments I caught made my stomach twist. Something about expectations, patience. Not everyone is built to handle pressure. The others chuckled. Veronica leaned forward, murmuring something, and Ethan laughed. There was a tone to it that I recognized too well from years of coaching, superiority disguised as humor. I had heard that tone from athletes who mocked those who fell behind, from men who believed compassion was weakness. It wasn't just arrogance I saw, it was cruelty dressed in charm, and still, there was no sign of Rachel. I shifted my weight, my boots crunching softly in the snow. The noise must have been louder than I thought, because for a brief moment, Charles turned his head toward the window. My heart skipped. I pulled back, breath held, hiding behind the porch column. Through the narrow edge of glass, I saw his expression just a flicker, no more than a second, but it was enough. His eyes were sharp, assessing. He had heard something, maybe sensed something. Then he dismissed it, turned back to the table, and continued his meal as if nothing in the world could reach him. The music inside changed again, from the gentle rhythm of carols to a lively tune, "Deck the Halls." Laughter swelled louder. Glasses clinked. I could almost feel the heat of the fire from where I stood, yet the cold outside was so biting that my fingertips burned. It struck me then how little effort it would take for them to open the door to notice the storm, to notice the silence, to notice that one of their own wasn't there. But they didn't. They sat in their golden bubble, comfortable in the belief that kindness was optional. A gust of wind cut through my coat, and I turned my back to it, letting my eyes wander across the porch. That's when I saw the small, neglected details, the snow that hadn't been cleared, the dead potted plants left by the railing, the faint outline of what looked like a broken ornament on the ground. They were signs of carelessness, the kind that grows when love leaves a home. I thought about the last time Rachel called me. It had been brief, her voice soft, distracted. She'd said she was fine, that Ethan was busy, that she didn't want me to worry. But mothers know when "I'm fine" is a disguise. There had been a pause in her voice, something she couldn't say. I remembered the silence after her fourth miscarriage, the way she had spoken to me through tears, apologizing as though she had failed the world. I told her then, as I had always told her, your worth isn't tied to anyone else's expectations. She had promised me she believed that. Looking at that empty chair inside the glowing house, I wondered if she still did. Snow began to fall harder, large flakes spinning down from the black sky. The wind picked up, rattling the porch railing. I pulled my scarf tighter, still staring through the window, hoping for even a glimpse of her shadow. The smell of roasted turkey drifted faintly through the cracks of the window frame, rich and heavy, almost nauseating now. The warmth inside looked blinding, almost obscene compared to the cold outside. A burst of laughter startled me. Ethan had said something that sent everyone roaring again. Charles slapped his hand on the table. Grace tilted her head back, laughing too loud, her bracelets chiming. I stared at them, trying to understand how joy could exist beside so much silence, how people could feast while someone else starved for love just beyond their door. The snow swirled again, covering my boots, the edges of my coat, even the small window ledge. I took a step back and looked at the whole house, glowing like a lantern against the dark. To anyone passing by, it would have seemed perfect, a family gathered for Christmas, warm and happy, but I knew now that the perfection was hollow. Every sparkle of light was just a reflection hiding something cruel underneath. And in that moment, standing alone in the snow, I realized the hardest truth a mother can face. Sometimes the world inside a home can be colder than the winter outside. The moment I heard that faint, fragile sound, the rest of the world went silent. The laughter from inside blurred into a distant echo, the wind seemed to hold its breath, and even the snow fell more slowly. I turned toward the porch, scanning the shadows, and that's when I saw her curled into herself like a forgotten child, small and still against the dark. The porch light cast a weak halo around her, flickering as if unsure she was really there. Rachel. For a heartbeat, my mind refused to accept it. My daughter, my only child, the same girl who used to run barefoot through our backyard summers ago, was sitting in the snow like someone discarded. Her blouse clung damply to her arms, soaked through with melted flakes. Her hair, usually brushed into that neat bun she wore for work, was tangled, plastered to her forehead. Her lips were pale, almost gray, and her bare feet hung limp in thin slippers already crusted with frost. I dropped my suitcase without realizing it. "Rachel!" I called out, my voice catching in my throat. It came out rough, like it belonged to someone else. She didn't answer. I rushed forward, kneeling beside her, brushing her hair back from her face. Her skin was so cold it burned my fingertips. "Rachel, honey, it's Mom," I whispered, leaning closer. "Open your eyes, sweetheart." She stirred faintly. Her lashes fluttered, and when her eyes finally opened, they looked lost, unfocused, as though she didn't quite recognize the world, or maybe she didn't expect to find any warmth left in it. "Mom?" Her voice was barely a breath, fragile as the snow that drifted between us. "You came?" I felt something inside me break. "Of course I came," I said, wrapping my coat around her shoulders, tucking it tightly under her chin. "You're freezing." I pulled her closer, trying to share what little warmth my body still held. My arms remembered the weight of her from years ago, the toddler who refused to sleep without clutching my hand, the teenager who cried after her first heartbreak. Now she was shivering so violently that her teeth chattered against my collarbone. I pressed her face against my chest, rubbing her back, whispering her name again and again, as though saying it could undo the cruelty that had brought her here. The laughter from inside grew louder. Someone clinked a glass. I caught the faint edge of a man's voice. Ethan's voice boasting about something, then another round of laughter. They were celebrating while she sat outside, half frozen. The sound of it turned my stomach. "How long have you been out here?" I asked, my voice shaking. She tried to speak, but her lips trembled too much to form words. I just needed air," she finally whispered, her words disjointed. "I couldn't stay in there anymore. Her throat closed. "I didn't want to ruin Christmas." Ruin Christmas. That phrase hit me like a slap. I wanted to scream, to break down the door and make them see what they'd done. But instead, I took a deep breath and focused on the girl in my arms. "You didn't ruin anything," I said softly. "They did." Her eyes filled with tears that froze before they could fall. I couldn't stand to see her like that, helpless, apologizing for her own suffering. I slid one arm under her knees and lifted her. She was lighter than I remembered, frighteningly light. The snow crunched under my boots as I carried her toward the door, her head resting against my shoulder. Every step felt like walking through water, heavy and deliberate, anger pushing me forward. The warmth from the house spilled out through the seams of the door like a taunt. I could smell roasted turkey, cinnamon, and the expensive wine they probably reserved for special occasions, but there was nothing special about this night. I kicked at the step, steadying her weight, and pounded my fist against the wood. The sound echoed through the frame, loud enough to shake the wreath hanging above it. No one came. I hit the door again, harder this time. My knuckles throbbed. Still nothing. I could hear the music clearly now, jingle bells, upbeat and hollow. Rage built in my chest until I thought I'd choke on it. Finally, the door creaked open. Veronica stood there, her red lips curved in that same polite smile she'd probably worn all evening. Her eyes swept from my face to the bundle in my arms, and for the first time, her mask faltered. "Mrs. Coleman," she said, her tone syrupy. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I can see that," I said, my voice sharp as the cold. My daughter was sitting outside, in the snow. Her eyebrows arched, as if she hadn't heard me right. "Oh, Rachel," she said lightly, waving her free hand. "She needed some air. You know how sensitive she gets. It's nothing serious." "Nothing serious?" My voice cracked. I pulled the coat tighter around Rachel and stepped forward. "She's freezing, Veronica. She could have died out there." Behind her, the laughter in the living room faltered. Ethan appeared, wine glass in hand, his shirt collar open. His eyes flicked from me to Rachel, and I caught a flash of annoyance, nothing more. "Mom, let her rest," he said flatly. "You're making it a bigger deal than it is." I stared at him. The man who had once promised to protect my daughter couldn't even look ashamed. "A bigger deal," I repeated quietly, every syllable trembling with disbelief. "You left her outside on Christmas Eve." He shrugged, trying for nonchalance. "She said she wanted to be alone. Don't turn it into something it's not." Rachel whimpered faintly in my arms, her head shifting against my shoulder. That small, unconscious sound sliced through me. I stepped past Veronica, brushing against her shoulder as I crossed the threshold. The air inside was thick with warmth, but it didn't touch me. I walked straight to the couch near the fire and set Rachel down carefully. The flames painted her face in a faint glow, and I could see the contrast, the blue of her lips against the orange light. She didn't belong in this house anymore. This wasn't a home. It was a stage where cruelty played at civility. I turned toward the table where the Harringtons sat, all eyes on me. For the first time that night, they were silent. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, every breath burning like frost. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly, "but remember this moment, because the next time you see me, I won't be standing outside your door." And with that, I pulled my coat tighter, wrapped Rachel in another blanket from the couch, and walked her back out into the night. The snow fell around us again, erasing our footprints as quickly as we made them, as though the house itself wanted to pretend we were never there at all. The door slammed against the wall with a sound that cracked through the house like thunder. For a moment, the world inside froze, the clinking glasses, the forced laughter, even the fire seemed to hold its breath. I stood there in the doorway, my boots dripping melted snow onto their polished hardwood floor, my daughter limp and pale in my arms. Warm air hit my face, thick with the scent of wine, roasted turkey, and something else, something rotten beneath all the luxury. Every head turned toward me, their smiles collapsed like paper masks. Veronica Harrington was the first to move, her glass tilted dangerously in her hand as she stepped forward, feigning surprise. "Mrs. Coleman, you can't just—" She stopped when she saw Rachel's face. For a brief second, guilt flickered across her features, so faint it almost looked like a trick of the firelight. Then it was gone, replaced by that familiar, polished calm. "Oh dear," she said, voice smooth as honey. "Rachel must have gone outside again. She does this when she's upset. You didn't need to make a scene." I stared at her. The way she said, "upset," sounded like an insult, not concern. My voice came out low, trembling but firm. "Upset? She was freezing on your porch, Veronica. Barefoot. I could barely get a pulse." Veronica's lips parted, and I saw the faintest twitch of irritation. "You're exaggerating. She's emotional, that's all." I took one step forward. The snow from my boots melted into small puddles on the floor, spreading slowly toward her rug. Behind her, Ethan appeared, shirt half unbuttoned, glass of wine dangling carelessly from his fingers. He looked at me like a man bothered by an unexpected interruption. "Mom, calm down," he said, tone dripping with condescension. "She wanted to be out there. I told her to come in. She wouldn't listen." My hands clenched around Rachel's body, fury surging through me. "You told her? You watched her sit there in the cold? And you did nothing?" He laughed once, short and sharp. "I'm not her babysitter." The words hit me harder than any insult. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then something inside me snapped a soundless fracture, quiet but irreversible. I laid Rachel gently on the couch by the fire, my coat still wrapped around her, her lips trembling as she tried to breathe. I turned to face them. "You call this family?" I asked, my voice rising. "You call this love?" Charles Harrington pushed back his chair, standing tall, his expression unreadable. He was a man used to control, used to commanding silence with a single gesture. "That's enough, Mrs. Coleman," he said, his voice deep, authoritative. "This is our home. You don't barge in here shouting accusations. You don't understand our family dynamics." I met his gaze and saw the arrogance that came with power, the kind that believed money could smooth over any cruelty. "I understand plenty," I said. "I understand that my daughter has been living in fear, surrounded by people who mistake cruelty for discipline, and I understand that while you sit here pretending to be respectable, she's breaking piece by piece." His jaw tightened. "Be careful what you say." I took another step closer, my shadow stretching across their perfect tablecloth. "No, you be careful," I said, voice trembling with anger, "because tonight your secrets stop being whispers." A hush fell over the room. Only the fire crackled between us. Then Ethan laughed, the sound slicing through the tension. "You always were dramatic, Lydia. You think you can just walk in here and what? Save her? You've done enough damage. Maybe if you hadn't raised her to be so weak." I didn't let him finish. "Weak?" The word ripped out of me like a shout from somewhere deep in my chest. "You call her weak because she's been trying to survive you?" I pointed toward Rachel, still trembling beneath the blanket. "Look at her. She's not weak, she's exhausted. You've drained every ounce of joy she had, and now you're standing there proud of it." He flinched. Just a flicker. It was small, but I saw it. The mask of arrogance slipped for a second before he caught himself again. Behind him, Grace shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting from her father to me. Even Veronica's fingers tightened around her glass. The truth had landed. But Charles wasn't done. He straightened his jacket, his voice firm. "That's enough, Mrs. Coleman. You've said your piece. Take your daughter and leave. This is not your home." I stared at him. At the gleaming table lined with gold-rimmed plates, the fire crackling in the background, the Christmas garland perfectly arranged along the mantel. Every detail was designed to show wealth, order, control. And yet beneath it all, I could feel the rot. "You're right," I said quietly. "This isn't my home, but it stopped being hers a long time ago, too." I turned to Rachel, brushing the hair from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, searching for me. "Mom," she whispered weakly, "please don't." "I'm not leaving you here," I said softly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Not another minute." Ethan stepped forward. "You can't just take her." "Watch me." The words came out steady, final. For a moment, no one moved. Then Veronica spoke again, voice cold as glass. "You're making a mistake, Mrs. Coleman. You can't protect her from everything. Some women just aren't built for family life." I looked at her, this woman wrapped in silk and self-importance, and felt a wave of pity so deep it surprised me. "No," I said. "Some women just never learned what love is supposed to look like." I scooped Rachel back into my arms, her body limp against me, and turned toward the door. The silence behind me was thick, suffocating. When I reached the threshold, I stopped and looked back one last time. "Enjoy your dinner," I said. "I hope it tastes like the lives you've ruined." Then I stepped into the night. The cold hit me instantly, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that house. As I carried Rachel down the path, the snow fell harder, erasing the footprints we left behind. By the time I reached the street, It was as if the night had swallowed every trace of us. But the fire that burned in me wouldn't fade. I knew this was only the beginning. The storm waiting inside that house would follow us into courtrooms, headlines, and sleepless nights. But I also knew something else. I wasn't the same woman who had arrived here hours ago, clutching a suitcase and a hope for peace. I was a mother again, and this time I wasn't coming quietly. The night after I took Rachel away, I didn't sleep. I sat by her bedside, listening to her shallow breathing, every sound a reminder of what she had endured in that house. The image of her trembling under that porch light wouldn't leave me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her lips turning blue, her frail body slumped against the cold wood. But it wasn't the winter that haunted me most. It was the faces of the people who had watched her unravel and called it discipline. By dawn, my resolve had hardened into something sharper than anger. I had spent decades teaching people how to control their strength, how to channel it with purpose. Now, that same discipline was the only thing keeping me from breaking down. I wasn't just fighting for my daughter anymore, I was fighting for every mother who had ever been told to stay quiet for the sake of appearances. That morning, I went to the police station. I told them everything: how I had found Rachel outside, how her husband and his family had dismissed her suffering, how they had belittled her for years. The officer on duty listened carefully, but with the detached patience of someone who had heard too many stories that ended the same way. He promised to file a report, but warned me that emotional abuse cases were hard to prove. His words felt like cold water, but they didn't stop me. I left the station with a copy of the report clutched in my hand and a plan already forming in my mind. When I returned home, Rachel was sitting up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring blankly at the window. Her eyes looked hollow, her face drawn. She turned slightly when I entered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, please don't make it worse," she said. "They'll find a way to turn it against you." I sat beside her and took her hand. It felt fragile, almost weightless. "Rachel," I said, "there's no peace in silence. They've already taken too much from you, from both of us. It ends now." She tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. "You always think you can fix everything." "I don't want to fix it," I said softly. "I want to stop it." For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the wind against the windows. I could tell she wanted to believe me, but didn't know how. She had spent so many years shrinking herself to fit the mold. Ethan's family demanded, obedient, grateful, quiet. Somewhere along the way, she had begun to believe their lies. That afternoon, I called an old friend, James Allen, a lawyer I'd met years ago when the community center faced a property dispute. He had a reputation for taking on cases most people avoided. When I told him what happened, there was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "If what you're saying is true, they've crossed a line that even money can't hide." He agreed to meet that evening. Before he arrived, I sorted through the papers I had kept, bank statements, text messages, small notes Rachel had written me when she needed money for groceries or repairs. Each line between us was proof that I had supported her while Ethan controlled her finances. Each record was another thread in a web of evidence. When James arrived, he carried a calm energy that steadied the room. He reviewed everything, his eyes narrowing as he read through the receipts. "This is more than enough to start," he said finally. "But I need something that ties their words to their intent. Anything that shows what they've said to her." That was when I remembered the sound I had heard through the window, their laughter. The words about her being useless, about how a woman who can't give children should learn her place. If only I had proof of that moment. And then I thought of someone who might. Officer Nate Turner. He had been there that night, standing on the sidewalk when I carried Rachel away. He had seen her condition, had heard at least part of what happened inside. I called him immediately. When he picked up, his voice was steady, but I could hear the hesitation behind it. "I heard more than I wanted to," he admitted. "I can testify to what I saw, but you know how powerful the Harringtons are." "I know," I said. "That's why I need someone with courage. Someone who remembers what I taught them about honor." There was a pause, then a quiet sigh. "You always had a way of convincing me, Mrs. Coleman," he said. "I'll help." The next day, James filed the case, emotional and financial abuse, supported by medical and witness reports. I watched the papers slide across his desk, feeling the weight of years of silence finally begin to crack. But my determination didn't erase the fear. The Harringtons were well connected. Charles had friends in the courthouse, in the police department, even in local politics. I knew what I was stepping into: a fight against power, image, and influence. Yet I also knew what they underestimated: a mother's endurance. That evening, Rachel asked me what would happen next. Her voice was small, hesitant. "What if they win?" she said. I looked at her and saw the woman she had once been, the bright, eager girl who believed in fairness. "Then we make them pay in the one way they can't stop," I said. "We tell the truth. We let everyone see who they really are. People like them live off their reputation. Take that away, and they crumble." The next morning, I woke before sunrise and stood by the window, watching the city come alive. The streets glistened under the thawing snow, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. Not because I believed the battle would be easy, but because it had finally begun. I thought of what Charles had said, how a woman who couldn't bear children should learn her place. I smiled bitterly at the memory. I had learned my place, but it wasn't beneath anyone. It was beside my daughter, standing guard. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater. Rachel slept on the couch, her face calm, her breathing steady. I knew the road ahead would be long. There would be courtrooms, testimonies, public scrutiny. But I also knew this: every storm begins with one person refusing to stay silent. And I, Lydia Coleman, had just spoken my first word of war. The weeks that followed felt like moving through fog, days and nights, blending together in a rhythm of exhaustion, worry, and relentless preparation. My small apartment became a war room. The dining table that once held quiet dinners now overflowed with papers, photographs, receipts, and handwritten notes. Every evening, the light from my old desk lamp stretched across the room, illuminating the battlefield of my determination. I had fought many battles in my life, but none like this. This was not about medals or titles. It was about saving what was left of my daughter's spirit. Rachel spent most of those days in silence. She sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the world outside as though it were a place she no longer belonged to. Sometimes, she would whisper something about the past, how Ethan used to be kind, how she kept believing that one day his love would return. But the tone of her voice told me she no longer believed it. She was just trying to make sense of her own pain, to justify years of cruelty with fragments of memory that didn't hurt as much. At night, I would wake to the sound of her crying quietly into her pillow. I wanted to hold her, to tell her that everything would be all right, but I had learned that healing couldn't be forced. So instead, I gave her what I could: space, warmth, and the assurance that this time, she wasn't alone. One afternoon, as I sorted through a box of documents, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, I found Nate standing there, his uniform replaced by a plain jacket. In his hands, he held a brown envelope. "I made copies of everything," he said, his voice steady but his eyes weary. My body camera picked up more than I realized that night. Inside the envelope were photographs and audio files, proof that Rachel had been left outside in freezing temperatures, and faint voices from inside the house mocking her condition. It wasn't perfect evidence, but it was something solid, something real. I felt a lump rise in my throat as I thanked him. Nate had always been one of my most disciplined students, the kind of boy who used to stay late after class, practicing kicks until his legs shook. Seeing him now, a man risking his career to do what was right, reminded me that good still existed in the world. "I'll testify," he said simply. "If they try to silence you, I'll be there." After he left, I placed the envelope in the middle of the table and sat staring at it for a long time. That single packet of evidence represented more than a legal advantage, it represented belief. Someone else had seen what I saw. Someone else understood the truth. The next morning, James Allen, our lawyer, stopped by to discuss the strategy. His tone was measured, cautious. "They'll come at you hard," he warned. "Charles has influence in the courts. They'll try to discredit you, call you emotional, unstable, anything to weaken your credibility." "I'm used to being underestimated," I said quietly. "It gives me room to strike." He smiled faintly, a shadow of admiration in his expression. You remind me of someone who doesn't know how to quit. I don't, I replied. I taught my students to keep fighting until the last bell. Why should I live any differently? But even warriors have moments of doubt. That night, after Rachel had gone to bed, I sat by the kitchen window watching the city lights blur in the falling snow. For the first time, I felt fear not of losing the case, but of losing her again, not to death, but to despair. I knew that legal victories couldn't erase the trauma of years of humiliation. I could bring her justice, but I couldn't give her back the sense of safety those people had stolen. I turned off the light and walked into her room. She was asleep, her face calm in the dim glow of the streetlight outside. On her nightstand lay a sketchbook she had started keeping a quiet therapy. I flipped it open and saw drawings of trees, waves, and sometimes a pair of hands holding another. Her art was full of longing but also resilience. She was fighting too, in her own quiet way. The next morning she surprised me. "Mom," she said softly, "can I come with you to see the lawyer today?" I looked at her, startled. Her voice was still weak, but there was determination in it. "Are you sure you're ready?" She nodded. "I'm tired of hiding." That was the first time I'd seen a spark in her eyes since Christmas Eve. It was faint, but it was there, a small flame refusing to die. We went together, and though she trembled when she spoke, she told James everything. Every insult, every manipulation, every moment they made her believe she was worthless. The more she spoke, the steadier her voice became, as if each confession peeled away a layer of fear. When we left his office, she stopped on the steps and looked up at the gray sky. "I thought I'd never be free of them," she said, "but now I just want to live again." I reached for her hand and squeezed it. "You will," I said. "I promise." That night, as snow fell again, Nate called to check on us. "They're not happy," he said. "The Harringtons know something's coming. I've seen one of their lawyers at the station, fishing for information." I thanked him and hung up, staring at the phone for a long time. Their power was real, but so was our truth. I thought about everything I had taught my students about balance, how even the smallest movement, when guided by purpose, could topple a giant. That was what this was now, a match between two forces, privilege and persistence. In the days that followed, I transformed every ounce of fear into preparation. I organized the evidence, memorized dates, reviewed statements. I trained like it was a tournament, my mind replacing the mat with the courtroom. There was no referee in this fight, only the truth, and I was ready to make it count. By the end of the week, Rachel began to eat again. She slept longer. The dark circles under her eyes started to fade. One evening, as I poured her tea, she said, "Mom, when this is over, I want to help other women like me." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened, and all I managed was a nod. That was the moment I knew we were both changing, not just surviving, but reclaiming our lives. And as I stood there watching her, I realized something profound. Justice isn't born in courtrooms or carved into verdicts. It starts quietly in small apartments, in whispered promises, in the steady hearts of those who refuse to let cruelty be the final word. The morning of the hearing was a pale gray, the kind of colorless dawn that made everything look suspended between night and day. Snow had fallen again, thin and powdery, softening the hard edges of the city. I woke before the alarm, sat up in the quiet, and let my breath steady. Years of training had given me that instinct to find stillness before a fight. The courtroom wasn't a mat, but the rhythm was the same: focus, patience, control. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. She wore a simple navy dress and the pearl earrings I'd given her on her wedding day. For a long moment, I just looked at her. There was fragility in her posture, yes, but also something new: resolve. Her bruises had faded, but the shadows of her fear lingered. When she met my eyes, she tried to smile, and though it barely reached her lips, it was enough. "Are you ready?" I asked. She nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." When we arrived at the courthouse, the steps were already dusted with snow. People passed by without meeting our eyes, their faces turned down against the cold. Inside, the air was dry, almost sterile, carrying the faint smell of paper and disinfectant. The echo of footsteps followed us down the hallway. Rachel's fingers brushed mine, searching for reassurance, and I squeezed her hand gently. James Allen met us at the entrance to the courtroom, a stack of folders under his arm. "They've brought an entire legal team," he said quietly. "Charles is here too." Of course he was. I expected nothing less. People like the Harringtons didn't fight because they were right, they fought because they weren't used to losing. When we entered, their presence filled the room like perfume, expensive, suffocating, impossible to ignore. Charles sat in the front row, his jaw firm, his posture perfect. Veronica sat beside him, head held high, dressed in cream wool and diamonds. Ethan was farther down the table with his lawyer, looking restless, his eyes darting between us and the judge's bench. He looked smaller than I remembered, though arrogance still clung to him like cologne. The bailiff called the room to order, and the sound of the gavel struck like a heartbeat through the silence. I took my seat beside Rachel. Her shoulders rose and fell with every breath. When she looked at me, her eyes were clear, no longer pleading. That steadiness gave me strength. The first part of the hearing was procedural names, documents, motions. I barely listened. My attention was on the weight of the moment, the hum of power that surrounded the Harringtons. Their lawyers spoke with the kind of confidence that comes from knowing how many judges owed you favors. James kept his composure, but I could see the tension in his hands as he flipped through the files. When it was our turn, Rachel's testimony began. Her voice shook at first, each word careful, deliberate, as though she were walking barefoot across glass. She spoke of the isolation, the manipulation, the way Ethan's family had turned every act of cruelty into an accusation against her character. The courtroom was silent except for her voice. When she described the night I found her on the porch, her words trembled and tears slipped down her cheeks. Ethan's lawyer interrupted more than once, objecting, rephrasing, undermining. But every time Rachel steadied herself, every time she refused to be silenced, the atmosphere in the room shifted. By the time she finished, even the stenographer had stopped typing for a moment. Then came the defense. They spoke smoothly, skillfully, painting Rachel as unstable, overly emotional, prone to dramatics. Veronica even took the stand, her tone sweet and measured, claiming she had only ever wanted to help her poor daughter-in-law adjust. I watched her speak and felt both anger and pity. Lies had a way of sounding beautiful when dressed in calm voices. Ethan's testimony was worse. He leaned back, playing the role of the misunderstood husband. "I tried my best," he said, looking directly at the judge. "But she pushed me away. I never hurt her. She exaggerates everything. She's fragile." That word again. Fragile. It echoed in my ears like a taunt. When it was time for the evidence, James stood and motioned to Nate, who had been waiting quietly at the back of the room. He approached the bench and handed over the flash drive containing his body camera footage. The audio played through the speakers, distorted but clear enough to make the truth undeniable. Rachel's faint cries for help, the sound of laughter inside, Ethan's dismissive tone. The room grew colder as it played. Veronica's hand tightened around her husband's arm. Ethan stared straight ahead, jaw locked. When the recording ended, silence lingered for several seconds before the judge cleared his throat. "This will be reviewed," he said, his voice neutral, but I could tell he was shaken. Even so, the Harringtons weren't finished. Their lawyer objected, arguing that the recording violated privacy laws, that it was inadmissible. The judge listened, expression unreadable, and finally nodded. "Objection sustained. The evidence will not be considered." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Rachel gasped softly beside me, and I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. All that proof, all that truth, dismissed with a single phrase. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, forcing myself not to react. They wanted outrage. They wanted emotion they could label as instability. When the hearing ended, the judge announced that the decision would be delivered within the week. We gathered our papers in silence. The Harringtons walked out first, their faces calm, almost triumphant. Ethan turned once as he passed us, his eyes full of contempt. "You should have stayed out of it," he muttered. I looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. "You've mistaken silence for surrender," I said quietly. "You'll learn the difference." Outside, The sky was beginning to darken. Rachel stood at the top of the courthouse steps, tears glistening in her eyes but not falling. I put my arm around her shoulders. "We told the truth," I said. "That's what matters." She nodded slowly, staring out over the snow-covered street. "Do you think anyone believed me?" I followed her gaze, watching people hurry past, their faces hidden by scarves and coats. "Maybe not everyone," I said softly. "But the ones who needed to, did. And sometimes that's how change begins, one heart at a time." We stood there together as the wind swept around us. I didn't know what the verdict would be, but I knew this much. Whatever came next, they had already lost something they couldn't buy back: the illusion of goodness. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt like the beginning of justice. The verdict came on a Tuesday morning. The city was quiet after days of heavy snow, the streets dusted white, the courthouse stark against the pale sky. Rachel and I arrived early, though neither of us had slept. She sat beside me on the cold bench outside the courtroom, hands clasped together, staring at the floor. I wanted to tell her it would be fine, that justice had a way of finding its path, but the truth was, I didn't know anymore. I had seen too many good people lose to money, to influence, to names that carried weight. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The Harringtons sat in their usual row, polished and composed. Charles's silver cufflinks glinted under the light. Veronica whispered something to Ethan, and they both smiled, small, knowing smiles, the kind that made my stomach twist. They believed they had already won. Maybe they had reason to. Their lawyers looked relaxed, confident. James, on the other hand, stood quietly by our side, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with frustration. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The sound of chairs scraping the floor echoed like thunder in my chest. The proceedings began quickly, no pleasantries, no build-up. The judge's voice was steady but flat, reading from the paper in front of him. The court grants the dissolution of marriage between the plaintiff, Rachel Coleman, and the defendant, Ethan Harrington. For a brief moment, relief flickered across Rachel's face. I felt it too, an exhale we'd both been holding for months. But the judge continued. The court, however, finds insufficient evidence to substantiate the claims of domestic or psychological abuse. My relief vanished. The words struck like ice water. Rachel blinked, stunned. The judge didn't pause, didn't look at her as he went on. As for the division of assets, the court recognizes the defendant's contributions to the household and career advancement during the marriage. Therefore, the majority of shared property, including the residence, is awarded to the defendant. The rest of his words blurred. I could barely hear over the pounding in my ears. Rachel's hands trembled. She sat frozen, her face pale, her lips pressed tight as if holding back a scream. I felt the sting of tears but forced them back. I would not cry, not here, not in front of them. When the judge finished, silence hung heavy in the room. The gavel fell once, final and absolute. Around us, the Harringtons began to move, calm and deliberate, like people closing a business deal. Charles rose first, straightening his tie, and turned to glance at me, a small, almost courteous nod, as though acknowledging a predictable outcome. Ethan smirked. "Told you this was pointless," he whispered when he passed by. I didn't speak. My throat ached from the effort of staying silent. Rachel buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking, not from anger but from the hollow weight of defeat. I placed my hand on her back, steady and firm. "Breathe," I whispered. "Just breathe." When we finally stood to leave, the courtroom was nearly empty. Nate waited in the back, still in uniform, his face tight with disbelief. "They can't just—" he started, but I stopped him with a look. "They already have," I said quietly. "For now." Outside, the world felt too bright, the air too sharp. Reporters gathered near the steps, their cameras ready. Someone shouted Rachel's name, asking how she felt about the decision, but she couldn't speak. I guided her past them, shielding her from the noise. Every flash of a camera felt like another wound. We reached the bottom of the steps, and I turned to look back at the courthouse. It stood tall, cold, and indifferent. For a moment, I wondered how many lives had broken inside its walls. How many truths had been dismissed because they didn't fit neatly into evidence and statutes. I wanted to scream, to tell the world what they'd done, but all I managed was a quiet vow to myself: this wasn't over. That night, our apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the heater. Rachel sat on the couch, her face hidden behind her knees. I made tea, the scent of chamomile filling the room, but she didn't touch it. Her voice, when it finally came, was barely a whisper. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was the problem. "No," I said firmly. "Don't let them make you believe that. You were never the problem, Rachel. They were." She looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then why does it still feel like I lost everything?" I sat beside her, pulling her into my arms. "Because you did lose something," I said softly. "But not everything. Not yourself, and that's the part they'll never own." In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The story spread first through whispers, then across local news. Someone had leaked the courtroom footage, a photo of Rachel holding back tears, with Nate standing behind her in his uniform, began circulating online. The caption read, "She fought for justice, and the system failed her." At first I worried it would bring more pain. But soon, messages began pouring in, strangers reaching out with words of support, women sharing their own stories, people questioning how such a powerful family could walk free. A journalist wrote an article titled, "The Harrington Case: When Silence Wins in Court, but Not in Hearts." It went viral overnight. For the first time since that night on the porch, Rachel smiled a small, tired smile, but real. "People believe me," she whispered, scrolling through the messages. "They actually believe me." "They see you," I said. "That's something no judge can take away." The Harringtons tried to fight back, of course. Their lawyers issued statements. Their publicist called it defamation, but the damage was done. The perfect image they'd built cracked, and the truth began to seep through. Charles's name was quietly removed from a committee. Ethan's firm suspended him. Veronica disappeared from society events. I didn't celebrate, not exactly. Justice bought through humiliation wasn't justice at all, but it was something, a shift, a reckoning. Late one evening, Rachel stood by the window, watching the snow fall again. "Do you think they'll ever understand what they did?" she asked. "No," I said. "People like them rarely do, but they'll remember you, and maybe that's enough." As she turned back toward me, her reflection glowed faintly in the glass, fragile yet strong. The world had taken almost everything from her, but somehow she still stood. And for me, that was victory enough. A quiet, defiant kind of justice that no gavel could erase. Winter eventually melted into spring, and with it, the sharpness of our pain began to dull. Life didn't return to normal, it couldn't, but it found a quieter rhythm. The mornings grew brighter, sunlight spilling into our small apartment like an invitation to breathe again. Rachel started to wake before me, her footsteps soft in the kitchen as she prepared breakfast. The first time I heard the faint clatter of dishes and smelled toast, I froze, afraid it might be a dream. For months she had barely eaten. Now she was making coffee, humming faintly under her breath, a tune I hadn't heard since she was a child. I walked into the kitchen and watched her from the doorway. The bruises on her soul would take longer to fade than any mark on her skin, but I could see change in her eyes. There was focus again, the smallest spark of purpose. She turned, startled to see me awake so early, and smiled. "You used to do this for me," she said. "I thought it's about time I returned the favor." It wasn't just breakfast she was reclaiming. Little by little, she began to take her life back, organizing her things, sketching again, even joining therapy sessions with Dr. Carter twice a week. I saw her shoulders straighten, her words steady. She was rebuilding herself piece by piece, no longer measuring her worth by what she could give to others, but by the strength it took to survive. Nate became a steady presence in those days, visiting often but never imposing. He would stop by after his shifts, sometimes with a small bouquet of flowers or a paper bag filled with pastries from the corner bakery. Rachel pretended not to care, but I could tell the gesture touched her. He spoke to her gently, never pitying, always listening. Once, I overheard him tell her, "You don't owe anyone your silence. You just owe yourself peace." That sentence stayed with me long after he left. There was an evening, sometime near Easter, when the three of us went for a walk through Boise's main square. The city was alive with color and sound, children running with balloons, couples holding hands, the smell of warm cinnamon and baked pies drifting through the air. Rachel wore a light yellow sweater, her hair pulled back. When she laughed at something Nate said, the sound startled me. It had been so long since I'd heard it. We sat by the fountain, the water catching the late afternoon light. Rachel turned to me, her eyes glistening, not from sadness but something deeper. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she said softly. "I'm not sure I'm completely there yet, but I think I'm learning." I reached for her hand and squeezed it. "You don't have to be whole right away," I said. "Healing isn't a race." Later that night, when the lights in the square dimmed, we sat on a bench sharing churros Nate had bought from a nearby stand. I watched them talk, their words gentle, full of pauses that didn't need filling. Rachel had spent so long around people who made her small, now she was with someone who made her seen. There was something healing about that kind of quiet companionship. It asked nothing, demanded nothing, simply existed. Weeks passed, and though her case had faded from headlines, the community hadn't forgotten. Women began reaching out to me, some neighbors, some strangers asking how to protect their daughters, how to fight back when the system failed them. I didn't have all the answers, but I had stories. And stories, I learned, can build bridges where justice cannot. That was when the idea began to form a foundation for women recovering from abuse and coercion, a safe place to start over. James helped me draft the paperwork, and Dr. Carter offered to connect us with local therapists. We called it New Light, a name Rachel chose herself. When I asked her why, she said, "Because even after the darkest nights, light still finds a way in." The first meeting was small, just 6 women sitting in folding chairs in a rented room. But when Rachel stood to speak, her voice steady and warm, I knew this was only the beginning. She didn't tell her whole story that day, she didn't need to. The strength in her presence said everything. As she spoke, I saw other women nodding, tears glinting in their eyes, the kind of tears that come when someone finally puts words to your own pain. That evening, when we walked home, Rachel looked lighter. "Mom," she said, "I used to think my life ended that night you found me, but maybe that was the night it began again." I didn't answer right away. The truth was, that night had changed both of us. It had stripped away everything we thought we knew about justice, about family, about strength. But it had also revealed something indestructible, the power of love unbroken by cruelty. The seasons turned. Rachel began working part-time at a community center, helping organize support workshops. Nate visited often, bringing new life into our quiet home. Sometimes, I would find them in the kitchen, laughing over burned cookies or mismatched mugs, and I would smile quietly, letting their joy fill the room. On the first anniversary of the trial, we returned to the same square in Boise. The air was warm, and tulips lined the walkways. Rachel wore a simple white dress, her hair down. She stood by the fountain, gazing at the rippling water, then turned to me. "Do you still think about them?" she asked. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not with anger anymore, just with gratitude that we walked away." She nodded, a soft smile forming. "Maybe forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said. "Maybe it just means choosing peace over pain." As the church bells rang in the distance, I looked at her, the woman she had become, the daughter I had nearly lost, and felt something shift inside me. For years, I had taught others to fight, to defend, to resist. But now, watching Rachel, I realized that the greatest kind of strength wasn't in the fight at all, it was in the grace to heal after it. Before we left, Rachel slipped her hand into mine. "Mom," she said, "thank you for saving me." I squeezed her hand, my throat tight. "No," I whispered, "you saved yourself. I just reminded you you could." We walked home as the sky turned gold, the city alive around us. For the first time in a long time, I felt at peace, not because justice had been served in court, but because we had reclaimed our own version of it. The kind that doesn't need verdicts or headlines, only courage, love, and the quiet certainty that light always returns. As the last echoes of winter faded, what remained between Rachel and me was not just survival, but transformation. We had walked through a fire that burned away illusions about justice, about strength, about what it truly means to love someone enough to stand beside them in the dark. The courts had failed us, but life had not. In its quiet, patient way, it had given us a second chance to build something gentler, wiser, and infinitely stronger. The journey from despair to peace wasn't sudden. It came in small moments. Rachel's laughter returning, the sound of her pencil sketching again, the simple joy of sharing tea in silence. Each moment was a fragment of healing, proof that even after cruelty, the human spirit could rise. We learned that victory doesn't always come wrapped in verdicts or applause. It comes in breath, in courage, in the ability to face the day without bitterness. I began to see life through new eyes. I no longer wished for revenge, but for understanding. The Harringtons' power, once so intimidating, now seemed hollow, built on fear, sustained by silence. Their wealth could command the law, but not the truth. The truth, once spoken, had a life of its own. It spread in whispers, in the empathy of strangers, in the stories of women who reached out after hearing ours. That was the real justice, the one born not in a courtroom, but in hearts that refused to look away. When Rachel founded New Light, it felt like the final step in closing that old wound. Watching her help others, seeing her listen with compassion that came from her own pain, it made me believe that suffering, when faced with grace, can become purpose. The scars didn't vanish, but they turned into maps of where we had been and how far we had come. Now, as I sit by the window each morning, sunlight warming my hands, I understand something that once eluded me. Peace isn't the absence of pain, it's the decision to stop letting pain define you. The world will always have people like the Harringtons, but it will also have people like Rachel, like Nate, like every survivor who chooses hope over hatred. The balance of those forces, that's what keeps humanity alive. Justice is not always about punishment. Sometimes it's about creation, creating safety where there was fear, dignity where there was shame, and compassion where there was cruelty. In our everyday lives, we can carry this lesson by standing up for someone whose voice trembles, by listening when it's easier to turn away, and by remembering that our silence can either shield injustice or stop it. If you've ever faced a moment where doing the right thing meant standing alone, ask yourself this: did your silence protect peace, or did it protect pain? Tell me in the comments, which do you believe is stronger, forgiveness or justice? Comment A for forgiveness or B for justice, and let's see how many hearts still believe in the power of healing. And if this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep sharing more true-to-life stories of courage, family, and redemption.